Wednesday, we're going to be looking at the countries of Rwanda and Burundi. Sorry we ran out of time last week before we could do this. After we look at Rwanda and Burundi, we're going to move on to the countries that are on the Horn of Africa. These two countries, Rwanda and Burundi, they are each about the size of Maryland, so that means they're very small countries. They sit on a ridge that separate the Nile and the Congo. Uh, the Nile and the Congo have watersheds, and that's where they sit. A watershed is like a region that is drained by a river, and so to the west on the ridge here in these two countries, water runs into the Congo River and then it flows to the Atlantic. On the east of this ridge, the water eventually becomes part of the Nile River, and then it flows into the Mediterranean. Uh, as in Uganda, high elevation gives Rwanda and Burundi a moderate climate, even though they lie near the equator. Heavy rains allow dense forests to grow, uh, and within these forests, uh, they're very famous for having a lot of gorillas here, and scientists have named the gorillas as endangered species. And as you know, endangered species are really it's a plant or animal that is endangered of threatened by extinction, and so they try as hard as they can to protect the gorillas there. Farmers in Burundi and Rwanda work small plots that dot the hillsides. Coffee is the main export. The people who live along Lake Kivu, Tanganyika, easy for me to say, huh? They also fish. And so fishing and small farms is what really provides their livings. And because they're both landlocked, they have trouble getting their goods to foreign buyers. There are few paved roads and no railroads exist. So when we've traditionally talked about that theme of movement, this becomes a very important theme or lack of in Rwanda and Burundi. The Hutu and the Tutsi are the two main ethnic groups there in Rwanda and Burundi. The Hutu make up about 80% or more of the population in both the countries. In the 1990s, there was a really bad civil war, and thousands of people were killed, um, and 2 million became homeless or refugees, and they had to go to another country to keep from getting hurt. The fighting between these two groups, the Hutu and the Tutsi, has lessened, but both countries face a lot of challenges as they continue to try and rebuild. Okay, now to the Horn of Africa. If you look here, this section here is called the Horn of Africa, and as you might can tell by looking at it, it's called the Horn of Africa because it looks like a horn. And plain and simple, that's the reason this is called the Horn of Africa. And inside that, we're going to talk about the countries of Sudan and South Sudan. Sudan used to be one country, now it's two, and we'll talk about that in a moment. We're going to talk about the country of Ethiopia, Eritrea, and then we're going to talk about Djibouti, and we're going to also talk about Somalia. And hopefully, we'll do that quickly so you can get back on with your day. Sudan and South Sudan. Um, as I said, this up until 2011, this was one country. 2011, South Sudan, the bottom 10 countries, broke away from Sudan, making it the newest country in the world up until December of 2019, when Papua New Guinea had a split and made a new country there. And so when we talk about the northern part, that would now be the Sudan. When we talk about the southern part, it would be South Sudan. The northern part is covered by the sand dunes of the Sahara and the Nubian deserts. Nomadic herders they raise camels and goats, and the nomads are people who they move around kind of as a living. The most fertile part of the country is in the central region, though. In this area, there are grassy plains, and there are two main tributaries of the Nile River. The Blue Nile River and the White Nile River join together at Khartoum, which is Sudan's capital. The southern part of Sudan receives plenty of rain and has some fertile soil. It also holds one of the world's largest swamps, which drains into the White Nile. Most of Sudan's people live along the Nile River, and That is where the farming is done. They use the water from the Nile to irrigate their fields. The things that farmers grow there include sugar cane, grains, nuts, dates, cotton. But the country's leading, which is the country's leading export, that is cotton. Sheep and gold are also important exports there. Most of the people in the northern two-thirds, which would now be known as Sudan, are Muslims. Most of the South, which is now known as South Sudan, are Christians. And part of the ideological war that happened was because of those two religions. In addition, there is now some oil down in South Sudan, and it just gives them another thing to really war over, and it happens quite often in that area. Ethiopia. Ethiopia's landscape varies from hot lowlands to rugged mountains, and if you look at a map of it, it's a large area, and so you can see why there would be such a variance there. The central part of Ethiopia is a highland plateau sliced through by the Great Rift Valley. If you could count how many times we've talked about the Great Rift Valley, you would be doing well. We see a lot about the Great Rift Valley, and it makes up much of the landscape of the entire continent. That is the Great Rift Valley. Mild temperatures and good soils make the highlands Ethiopia's best farming region. I know we've often talked about the plains and the lowlands here in the United States and some in South America being the best place to farm, but here the highland makes a better area because the temperatures tend to be a little bit lower. Farmers raise grains, sugarcane, potatoes, and coffee. Coffee is a major export crop. The Southern Highlands are believed to be the world's original home of coffee. Any of you coffee drinkers out there, maybe you should thank someone from Ethiopia if you ever see them. Rain is not very consistent in many parts of Ethiopia. Uh, Low rainfall in some years actually has brought droughts, and the people of Ethiopia suffer. Now, I'm giving you my age. I'm 46 years old. I graduated high school in 1992, and the famine in Ethiopia in the 80s really dominated the news cycle and how people were starving to death there. And that happened after a long time of drought. It turned the fields into like dust, and there wasn't a lot of things they could do to make food. And despite all the things that were done to help aid the food loss there, a million Ethiopians died in the 1980s because of that. They've got a very large population of 109 million people. Ethiopia has had more people than any other country in Africa. In fact, it's the second most populated outside of well, I cannot remember what the other one was, so we'll move on. There's one more that's more populated than that. I think it's can't remember right now. I'm sorry. About 63% of Ethiopians are Christians. Others practice traditional African religions. There's almost 80 languages spoken in Ethiopia, and Amharic, which is kind of is similar to Hebrew and Arabic, it is the official language of Ethiopia. Eritrea. Ethiopia may be one of Africa's oldest country, but Eritrea is one of the newest ones. As we said, South Sudan is newer than that, but Eritrea is one of the newest ones. It occurred in 1993 that after 30 years of war, Eritrea won its independence from Ethiopia. It sits on the shores of the Red Sea. It's got a narrow plain that stretches about 600 miles along the coast. When Eritrea became a country, Ethiopia became landlocked, which means that Ethiopia no longer has access to the ocean. Most of Eritrea's 3.4 million people farm the land. Farming is uncertain work, again, because of the climate. The long war in Ethiopia also hurt the farming, though. The war did have a positive effect on some of Eritrea's people, and I think you're going to appreciate this. Women formed about a third of the army that won that war, and so after the war ended, the new government passed laws that gave women more rights than had ever been given before. Djibouti, one of my favorites to say, probably will be one of your favorites to talk about, the country Djibouti. To see the earth undergoing change, you need to visit Djibouti. The country lies at the northern tip of the Great Rift Valley, where three of the Earth's plates join. Now gather me there. It's at the tip of the Great Rift Valley, which makes a huge difference in all the country, and then three plates of the Earth join, which are huge slabs of rock. Um, as they separate, fiery hot rock rises out of the Earth's surface, causing volcanic activity. Djibouti wraps around the natural harbor at the point where the Red Sea meets the Gulf of Aden. This tiny country is one of the hottest, driest places on Earth. Its landscape is covered by rocky desert. Here and there, you'll find the desert interrupted by salt lakes and rare patches of grassland, but that just doesn't happen very often. And then finally, today, let's talk about Somalia. Somalia borders the Gulf of Aden, as we saw in Djibouti, but it also borders the Indian Ocean. It's shaped like the number 7 if you look it up on a map. It's about the size of Texas. Like Eritrea and Djibouti, much of Somalia is hot, dry country where farming is difficult. Most of Somalia's people are herders, and they do that on the country's scrubby plateaus. In the south, rivers provide water for irrigation. Farmers here, when they can farm, grow fruits, sugarcane, and bananas. Nearly all the people of Somalia are Muslims, but they are deeply divided among the branches of Islam. They belong to different clans or groups of people related to another. And so in the late 1980s, disputes between these clans led to civil war. When a drought struck a few years later, hundreds of thousands of people starved to death. Guys, this is not an uncommon theme that when drought and famine hit, people are starving to death. This is the second time we've talked about this in Eastern Africa. The United States and other countries tried to help them they tried to give them some order and give them some food, but the fighting continued, and often they kept aid from reaching the people who needed it because of the war. Even today, armed groups control various parts of Somalia, and you've probably heard about some of the violence that goes on there. There is really not a real government in charge there in Somalia. Well, guys, I hope that you are having a good day. Again, I hope you're able to get back to your life. Enjoy that, and I hope to see you soon. Bye bye.